This is the Okayest Trapper, part of the Okayest Podcast Network, with host Zach Hansen, author of Turning Feral. Hear stories, lessons, and fireside chats through a journey of hunting, trapping, and wilderness living in the modern age.
And welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by a company that I am very passionate about, Mountain Tough Fitness. If you are thinking about getting in better shape to go further and longer on your trap line, then their fitness app is for you. They tailor to all levels of fitness and offer on-screen coaching with little to no equipment needed. If you head over to mountaintough.com, MTNTOUGH.com, and use the promo code OKAYEST30, you will get a 30-day free trial. I've been following their program for several years now and can attest to it being a miserably good time. Now, today I am very pumped to have an acquaintance of mine on the podcast. He grew up in a small town in Washington State and has evolved into one of the world's best elk callers and built a successful business around it. He's the host of Cutting the Distance podcast, a part of the MeatEater crew, and has a background in trapping. Jason Phelps, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd go real light on like a background in trapping. We just kind of I was so pumped about it, maybe even more pumped to do it than hunting. And then I live in a state where like just as I was getting going, just starting to catch bobcat, beaver, otter, just kind of got turned down. But I love everything about it. Still get to help with a little bit of nuisance trapping around here and whatnot. But loved it and was like a student of the game. I can remember just like read the internet forums, trapperman.com, everything like how do I learn how to do this and be good at it, since I didn't really have much of a mentor. A little bit my uncle on the water side, but like the dry ground trapping for bobcat and was kind of all self-taught.
That's awesome. And you actually nailed the first question that I had, which was, growing up in Washington had to be wild because, I don't want to give away your age, but when we had chatted a little bit before, I know you were doing some of that trapping. You were really excited about it. But before we talk about what's happened in Washington, maybe can you recount what your earliest memory of trapping is?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm gonna say like we went out into the woods, me and a couple buddies. It was like early high school, so I'd say like I was maybe freshman, sophomore, and a couple of my buddies were more in junior high. And we'd, grandpas and uncles had passed down like old traps, so we just had none of our own. We were running on like old Duke conibears and like old long springs that like people had welded teeth on, nowadays I would never do that knowing what I know, but we were just using what we had. And I can remember my wife, now girlfriend at the time, her family had some property, and I can remember like they had like a creek that ran through it with a lot of muskrat. So we were setting like 110s, you were setting beaver, we were setting, just everything. And I can remember, we would go up there on the four-wheeler, kind of run our little trap line on her property, and we caught everything up there. We caught beaver, otter, muskrat. We caught bobcat and like a really unconventional like bank set, like a cubby bank set with a 220 conibear, in a bank with some beaver parts in the corner. So that was kind of our start. And I can remember as we were getting into it at that same time, my mother-in-law now would like drive us down an hour away. So we were trying to all get our trapper's education at that time so that we could all, become trappers and go do it. And so that was kind of my first exposure. And then as I wanted to learn more, kind of started running with my uncle on his longer like water trap line for beaver and otter, and really kind of learned the ins and the outs of I would say at that time they were almost running like a pre-commercial or a commercial trap line, where they were each putting up, 300 to 400 beaver a year.
Oh, wow.
100 plus otter a year, and like learned from him. And then learned really quickly that he could skin a lot faster. Like me messing with a beaver wasn't worth it. And so like we came up with like a drop box system where I would just get $5 for every beaver I dropped off, and I didn't have to touch them. So
yeah, that's awesome.
That was my exposure. And then over the next 3 or 4 years, we got to trap a little bit, and then it all got yanked from us here as far as body gripping traps. And that's a whole different story.
Yeah. I empathize wholly on the beaver thing. Sadly, I don't have a drop box where I can go and drop them off and still get a little cash and then not have to deal with skinning them. But, how long did it take for whether it was your uncle or whoever your mentor was that you ended up dropping off at to be like, okay, Jason, like you're pretty good at trapping. but good Lord, you suck in the skinning shed. Like, how many beaver did it take for you to kind of be like, yeah, this is not worth the squeeze?
I probably barely got out of the single digits. Like I was 10 to 12 in. Like this is just like, because I would go watch him, and my uncle still probably one of the best. He had a system where he had a 2x4 like screwed into a piece of plywood, and then he would have Dacron fishing line tied to triple hooks, and he would get him split up the belly, and he would use those triple hooks to basically pull tension. And so he clean skinned, and this is no exaggeration, from the time his knife touched a beaver, it would be clean skinned and on a board within 15 minutes and done.
So hold on, I'm trying to visually imagine this. So beaver laying belly up on a table, split up the middle like you're going to normally just do a round, and then hooks to kind of almost pull and get the tension on either side.
Yep. So just one side. So like, let's say it's the off side, he'd have his hooks in it, and he's pulling clean in the close side, and then he'd basically just peel around, where I was sitting, like trying to get around the caster. It was a slow process, and he just flew through it. And like I say, not only skinned, but clean skinned, and then on a board to side, because he did so many, he just knew this is this size, I need to stretch it to this, so there's no restretching, there was no, just very quick. And I'm like, shoot, for the time that it takes me versus the time I can see you do it, like I'm just going to take my $5, $7, $8, whatever it might be, based on the size, and just like, you can have all of these. And it was really no workload for him. On an average day, we'd bring maybe 3 or 4 beaver in, and so I mean, we weren't like overloading him compared to his trap line, but we realized real quick that was the best way to do it, was not to mess with them.
Yeah. And it sounds like you and your friends were learning to trap in the same way that I did, and a lot of other folks listening to this podcast are, which is kind of trial by error. Like you didn't have YouTube back then. You had some mentors, some guides. So what was the hardest part, if you can remember, of being consistent? And it sounds like you got to a point over those years before it was all yanked away of being consistent, but was it trial and error? Was it a certain cubby set, or was it just doing it all?
It was just a lot of, we just did everything. We threw, there was a little bit of guidance on the water side. Like I said, my uncle showed me, like, if you want to target otters at that time were high, like you need to be on your main streams. You need to find for these little crossover ponds, for them to get out of the water, they need to fish, blah, blah, blah. And so we learned on the water side, but as far as like bobcat, musk, it was really just throw everything at them. Just being in the woods all the time, like, oh, here's a bobcat toilet, like we'll set a foothold, and then we'll set a cubby if he comes down the road, like we'll try this. And then, like, all right, we caught him in the cubby, and then the next time it's like, all right, we got a skiff of snow, let's go spend the weekend driving just looking for tracks, figure out where and then that's really, like, on the bobcat side, really kind of like was the light bulb that went off. Hey, we got to scout, we got to know where in our area where these bobcats are traveling. These dead end spurs that suck for deer hunting, or like our money spots for bobcats, and you would figure out where they were traveling. And almost any time we would go up and do some pre-scouting before we did all of our sets, our catch percentage was way better than kind of uneducated blind sets. And so I would say we really learned by a lot of trial and error. There were a lot of months, I'm not saying weeks at a time, months at a time, where 110 just wouldn't get hit, or so you're like, well, this is kind of a waste of time. We did, learning to beaver trap, we set a lot of like side slides into, and like, we learned very quickly, like, this is a waste of our time. Like the bottom of the dam slide set is 99% more producing than a side set. And so we just learned over time, kind of on our own, a little bit of guidance, but I would say the majority of it was just trial and error. Like, hey, these traps sit for a long time, don't get touched, let's focus more on what's working.
Yeah. And just trying to understand and paint a picture, I think most listeners will know you from kind of your big game hunting, your call manufacturing, but this time in your life, like young teenager getting into trapping, did this parallel with your real start into big game hunting too, or did it precede it?
It was, so I've got a little bit of a compulsive, like, personality, and this, it all took over, right? Trapping, I could trap when I wasn't hunting season would roll around, we would stop trapping. It kind of all just tied in. It was all there at the same time. Like I said, I think if if trapping, I was super passionate about it, and if it would have been able to be legal, may have been more important to me than hunting, just because my family had such a long tradition. I had always remember my uncles, like that was their play money, right? If they wanted anything nice, if they wanted to buy a new truck, if they wanted to go on vacation, and so like in my head, I'm like, hey, not only is this awesome, I love to do it, but there's a potential, maybe at a young age, like that entrepreneurial spark was already there, that hey, I can do this, I love to do it, and make a little bit of extra money as well.
If you think back on it though, like the things you learned, and obviously you've become a very successful big game hunter. Are there any takeaways, if you had to pick one from your time trapping, knowing how much passion you did have for it, despite how short-lived it was, that translated very well, that you think has made you a better hunter today?
Yeah, and I would say trapping, and it may just be a parallel, but like I have a very, for those that don't know, I've got a professional engineering. I'm a professional engineer. My brain is very much geared to an engineer, or I hope your listener base doesn't take this the wrong way. Like a very, very like male driven, methodical. Like there's a problem, there's clues or there's solutions, and I need to go fix the problem. So like I've always applied this to trapping or hunting. Like there are obviously beaver, or there are obviously bobcat on the landscape. What are the signs they're giving us? What can we use against them? Like very methodically, like pick it apart. And so I would say that trapping may be translated, but it's reading sign, reading areas. And this isn't meant to discredit people that maybe aren't good at beaver trapping, but I realized very quickly, like beaver trapping was somewhat easy. It was easier, and maybe that's why I gravitated more towards the bobcat coyote trapping. Um, I didn't find as much success. I'm like, well, this beaver trapping's easy. I go out, find an active dam, I set a dive stick at the bottom, set my 330 up, and I usually have one the very first night. And so I would say it was just that, like, learning to read an area, learning to read the situation, from water trapping over to our land trapping. Is just and that's where, like, I would say the skiff of snow scouting was good for us. We're in an area we don't get a lot of snow, so you get that first little skiff. You make sure to go drive like a couple big loops, figure out where tracks are at, examine them. Like, hey, why did they go up to this fir tree at the end of a dead end spur? Like, well, that's where I'm going to set my trap. Is I'm going to carve out a 90-degree angle against that tree. He's obviously going to come back to it. I'm going to set my set there. And so learning to just read sign, learning to be a more educated trapper, and not just like I said, the 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 learning from having traps just sit and never get hit, and not wanting a trap to be that you know that worthless, I guess, or in that worthless of a spot, was what drove me. Like, I wanted all of my traps producing. I wanted all of my sets to be high percentage sets. And so that's really what drove me. It was like to be better. And for those that don't know me as well, like very competitive, like all the way through sports. I played all three sports. I still coach all three. Like, it's just deeply ingrained that I wanted to be as good at trapping. I wanted to be as good as it was out there. My percentage of traps was being hit all the time, and I was able to produce animals every time out.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that tenacity, and plus all the PEs I know are like you, very methodical, very want to figure out a solution to the problem. And I think another element of that, and you mentioned it, was just time out in the field. If you're a weekend deer elk hunter, you might go out scouting. Maybe consider picking up trapping, because it does force you to be out in the woods.
Yep.
Way more often. Because I mean, depending on your state, regulations might say you need to check your traps every 24 hours, 72 hours. And, if you're getting to a set that's just not being touched, you're going to get so frustrated that you want to adjust and figure out
Yep.
and play around with it.
Yeah. And to go back, the other thing that really kind of sparked is I was building a lot of my own traps, and I don't even remember if snares were legal back then, but I would go out in the shop and go to the hardware store, Ace Hardware, and I can remember my mom coming home like, why are you boiling washers in baking soda, and why are you boiling all this cable? And I would wind up my cable, boil it in baking soda, get everything off of it, and then I'd go out to the shop and bend my washers, drill my holes, make my snares. And I was just very involved. As I finally saved up a little bit of money, or I'd ask for Christmas, like, hey, I want some Belial 330s, I want 6 of them, and then I would get my, I would order my, hey, we're finally gonna have some 4-coiled coil springs for Bobcat, and I love the whole process. Like, hey, we got to speed dip our beaver traps, or hey, on our footholds, we're just going to boil them and get everything off, or boil them in fir boughs. And I love the whole process, learning. I was like I say, in high school, so I didn't have all kinds of money, so I was making do on hand-me-down traps that my uncle didn't want, and then some stuff that we could afford. And I loved everything. It was all about the gimmicks. I got crush proof swivels on my, on this or that. Now, where before it was like literally just tying a wire off and hoping to God he didn't like spin your wire and get loose. And so it was just a process growing from a few hand-me-downs up to having like a pretty legit, 24 land traps, probably 30 to 40, water sets. And then I love the process of getting out of football practice or basketball practice and like going to checking my trap line at night. Like it brought me to a place of everything you read, and it felt like it was a legit thing that we were doing, even though we were pretty podunk, for back in the day, in our little mini trap line.
Yeah, I empathize with that. I didn't grow up in a hunting or trapping family. I'm more on the adult onset side, but trapping, when you have some steel slung over your shoulder, like, you do feel like you're in a mountain man book. It's
Yep.
impossible to not get reconnected with that on a more visceral degree than maybe even walking around the woods with a bow, in my opinion.
Yep.
Which is pretty special. So you do this through high school, you're getting pretty good at it, and then the rug is ripped out from under you. What happened?
I mean, this would be a real deep dive, right? And this is some of the reasons why it's hunting or trapping regulation. Like, you don't ever want it to go to the ballot, especially when you live in a state like mine. You want it just to be handled by the Fish and Wildlife Commissions. This one, unfortunately, and I don't remember the initiative, it made it onto the ballot here in Washington. And I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but it was basically body gripping traps. So we could still trap with live traps, but that was really going to leave us to that. And it was kind of, I mean, I don't remember the numbers that passed, but all of us that were trapping kind of new in this state, the commercials that came out and were aired at that time, like, it did us no favors.
And real quick, I'm in Idaho. We have a strong trapping culture, but when you're saying commercials, like, were these actual ads run by anti-hunting, anti-trapping organizations on like regular cable TV?
Yeah, I mean, back then, I don't even know what they are anymore. I don't watch a whole lot of like local TV, Como News 4, Fox Channel 13, these anti-trapping pushes, or people running these agendas. They paid for full 30-second, 1-minute long commercials of animals, caught in traps. And this is where, like, I struggled with it. Like, I agree, like, I don't like watching a coyote stuck in a foothold, like, staring at you. I don't want to see those images. Like, that is not the glorious part of trapping for me. It's a necessary part, but I don't enjoy that. And you couldn't tell your side of the story. Like, I want, and it's hard, and this is where like a lot of people struggle. Like, I want that animal to be as comfortable as possible, even though I know I'm going to kill it at the end of this process. But in the meantime, like, I wish no will ill. So anyways, back to the thing, like, very tough for even me to handle commercials, right? And so they did a good job. The antis did a very good job getting their point across into the voting public. And I don't remember the numbers, but very, very lopsided vote. And within like one fell swoop, one try, all body gripping traps. Now, I don't want to laugh because it's not funny, but the way that the law was wrote, they quickly came back and amended some of it, because now all of a sudden these people in Seattle could no longer body grip trap moles. Like, oh, we love animals so much, except for those moles that make our yard, not as attractive. So we need body gripping traps back for moles and some other things. So aside from nuisance trapping, all of our body gripping traps were now illegal to be set, out in the woods on the ground. We were left with basically cage traps, and the effectiveness. I mean, anybody that knows, our bobcat trapping probably would have been the best thing we had going, but water trapping, it's just not as productive when you got to try to get beaver, otter, whatever into a live trap. And then, like I said, I like conibears because I don't have to. I feel like, yeah, I'm responsible for the death, but I don't have to do any end of
Dirty
life.
work.
I don't have to do any end of life stuff, there. And I liked it. With very rarity, you get a fast swimming otter, you may have to like dispatch, but for the most part, you go up to your conibear, things are dead when you get there. I didn't want to deal with body, or, I wanted to deal with that and not deal with live traps and having to dispatch everything that we caught. So
yeah, it's an interesting conundrum there too, where you get that kind of ballot box science where, yesterday I had the chance, and this will be out on a podcast that comes out after this one, where I spoke with the program manager for AFWA, which is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And I was actually doing some live trapping research for them on pine marten lately. And they've done tons of studies on the efficacy of footholds, conibears, live trapping. And the interesting fact is often the footholds or the conibears are way more ethical in the taking of an animal than a live trap. Because you get an animal in a live trap, they might be rattling around, trying to get out for potentially hours on end. So it's always surprising when people make decisions, maybe not based in fact.
Yeah. And like I say, we walked up to a lot of bobcats in footholds. Most of them appeared to be comfortable. They didn't like you getting real close to them. They get a little, but I mean, that was more of their protective, but I never felt like those things, we did catch a couple in live traps. Like those things look more nervous, more anxious, just like ready to crawl out of their skin than any of them that we just have in a foothold. There's like, oh, I'm kind of stuck by this tree for a little bit, and I agree. Like they seem way more adjusted, more calm to being in a foothold than a live trap.
So what does it look like? You mentioned that you still do some nuisance trapping, like in Washington State. Does that mean, unless you have a mole problem, that you have to have another type of license to do like private land?
Yeah, and I would say I do it more just to help my uncle, who has his nuisance license. I don't know. I think it's on a rotation list or on like an on-call list, and I don't know exactly how it happens. But yeah, basically it's got to be like justified. It's got to be approved. It's got to go through a process in order for the nuisance to, it's got to be flooding personal property or water, or property that's not considered wetlands and some of that. But to my knowledge, there is no nuisance aside from water. And really, I don't even know what the bycatch laws are. Otter can be, but it's really to target the beaver. And then I know he also sometimes my uncle will just remove the dams and not even deal with catching the critters. But sometimes he'll trap first, remove second, just to make sure it doesn't reestablish very quickly.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but like up where I live in Atlanta, Idaho, I've had the honor of having a nuisance license with Idaho Fish and Game to remove beaver because we have 68 miles of dirt road that's riverfront. And there's been times where beaver have flooded that road, causing literally millions of dollars of damage. And we took that approach before I got, my nuisance license in order to go just knock the dam down. But it is amazing how quickly they'll just rebuild, 30 feet further up, 30 feet further down. And it's just this never ending battle.
Yeah.
Unless you actually kind of take care of the problem.
Yeah. That's why usually he'll throw traps out for a couple weeks and then remove the dam. And then, sometimes they'll go up or down the stream and get off of that. You're just passing the problem on to somebody else though, if they do go up or down. But yeah, it's nuisance is really kind of, few and far between. I don't have any of my own traps anymore. It's kind of sold it all. I'm still a student of the game though. I every once in a while, if I'm bored, I'm like, I'm gonna get on trapperman.com and like I loved everything about it. And yeah, I miss it. There are times where I question if I did like it so much and I like big game hunting so much, why am I still here? And I could, talking to Steve and, guys from Wyoming, Idaho that still do it. I'm like, dang, I really wish I could, I would love to go challenge myself, on wolves and things that are supposed to be way more difficult to trap. Like I would love to go target, some other things that would challenge me. And like I say, I love being outside, but yeah.
Well, you're welcome in Atlanta, Idaho. We got 5 active packs running around, and we could put steel on the ground whenever you want.
All right, I'll have to think about that. And but yeah, it's one of those things where I did like it so much, and big game just kind of took over. But I've got an itch to get back at it. So maybe here later in life.
What's interesting too is I like to play in the hypotheticals. I'm a little bit of a dreamer. It's an interesting thought, given your engineering background, what you've been able to do in the big game world from an engineering perspective with your game calls, and we'll talk a little bit about that for some of the predator calls too. But in my fantasy world, what would a Jason Phelps foothold look like? What kind of engineering, if you put all of your faculties toward that over the last 20 years instead of big game calls, what we might be benefiting as a trapping community right now.
Yeah, you might be giving me too much credit, but that's just how my mind works, right? You look at like, I see how a long spring works, and you're like, I see how coil springs work and why you add, and then, like dogless trap, like all these ideas, like, is there any, and I'd have to probably pour some more coals to it, but like, is there a better mouse trap that we can build? Like, and I was tinkering though, like, we would just everything, like, night latch, and not only so you could set it at night when you're running your trap line, but like have a quicker, more crisp trigger. And we would miss a coyote, like, well, was it because my pan dropped, like, so all this stuff would enter my head, like, did he feel the pan start to move and pulled out, or so who knows what my traps would look like. But it always just interested me. A lot of my traps were like Duke hand-me-downs. Now you could do a lot of damage, but I'm like, safety springs suck. Like, yep. I had trapped myself multiple times in a Connor bear. Like, hey buddy, you want to get me out of this trap? Like, my thumb's pinched and my forefinger, and so I'm like, oh well, the Belials have like a way better safety system. And then nowadays, I was actually reading the post the other day, like there's like additional safety springs on like the top and like the trigger side of the trap. I'm like, I never had those.
Yeah.
Like, when I got towards the end, when I was finally strong enough to like set my trap in the water and not have to use like trap setters or like use my feet on the side of a bank, like I could remember the most, being so nervous, like, can I hold the bottom of this trap? Why I hold my trigger and like, let go real quick. And is this trap going to stay? Well, and so like all of that would come in. Like, I guess some of my own concerns would even come into my design, like really good safety springs, like external safeties that aren't even attached to the trap, but like I'm like, that thing would have been a lifesaver, especially as I was going through that stage of like learning how to set a trap, in waist deep water without getting, myself caught or snapped or worried that I was going to get snapped. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Like I was a guy that tinkered with everything, like, messed with my triggers, messed with my, just everything that I learned, because I wanted my traps to be the best, and I have a feeling my engineering would play into some sort of trap design if I was ever to jump back in.
Well, you might be getting a box full of wolf traps from me and being like, hey, I was thinking about XYZ. What would you do here? So if you find those in the mail, you'll know who they're from.
What's everybody using for wolf traps? Like, there towards the end for big cats, we were throwing some like MB750s out, but I don't even remember like what I don't know if you guys happen to use bigger ones for wolves or if that's the trap of choice.
That's still kind of the trap of choice. I'm using mostly MB750s. There's a guy, I'm not going to remember his first name, but Harris. He has Harris traps, another form of dogless with a pretty wide pan, which has been working well for me personally. But those are the two that I'm running for wolf.
Yep. Yeah, not a lot. I figure like the trap world's probably like a slowly evolving industry. What we ran, I guess, almost 20 plus years ago is still what's out there today.
Yeah. I think you're right. There's not a lot of innovation in that space. There are some things on trap releasing for non-target catches, up until very recently, if you catch a mountain lion in a wolf trap, you're taking your catch pole, putting it around its neck, putting the catch pole between your hip and the ground, and having you or your buddy go and take that 750 off that cat's foot. Yeah. Yeah, you have to have big brass ones for that.
Yeah.
But a gentleman, and again, I think his name is Reed, just came up with a very simple lever where you can put it over any foothold from like, um, a 550 all the way up to a 750 and just pull a lever at a pretty good distance that just opens the trap. So you can, keep distance between you and the animal. And, that's about the extent of innovation as far as I'm aware recently. So
Yeah. I don't know how long those like I say, the Conibear, like top, I don't even know what you'd call them. It looked like just like an external safety that was on the trigger side
Yep.
of the trap. Like that thing, I don't know how that's been around for a long time, but that thing, I would have loved that. Because that was like my point of contention with like, water trapping was I didn't like, I could get them set, but I didn't want that thing to go off once or these little Duke hooks that barely get around the spring gonna actually hold this time, or am I gonna snap myself again?
Yeah, pain is a great teacher though, and I think that's one of the things, whether it's trapping or hunting, especially for people who are getting into it later in life, maybe, you know, there's real consequences, and you find out the hard way once or twice, and you might become a little bit more innovative, even if you're not an engineer by trade.
Yeah. Come up with better ways to do it.
Yeah. When you were trapping, when was the reintroduction of wolves in Washington State?
It was about that time, I think. So we'd have been trapping 96, 97, 98, like in that time frame. And I believe wolves it was about, I mean, the same time Idaho kind of got them. We were kind of getting an influx from Canada, and then that push from, I think we had them. Now, still to this day, I don't know how many of your listeners are from Western Washington, and I'm not trying to make an argument. Some people are going to say they're already here, but like there's no documented packs in Western Washington where we were trapping. So we were kind of away from the wolves on our side. But yeah, they were on their way back at that time.
Okay. Yeah. So to your knowledge, has there been any conversations in Washington State about like the need for trapping for some of that? I mean, I think the answer is probably no, just based on the demographic in Washington State. But, like at least in Idaho, we have open hunting pretty much. You can go to the grocery store and buy a tag. But if you look at the number of wolves taken, it's probably 80-20 on, most of them are taken by trappers just because of the time out there and the need versus hunting, which is more opportunistic. I mean, do you know of anything in Washington, or do you foresee a future where that might actually come back up as a need?
I mean, we can't even hunt wolves here, right? Part of our reestablishment or our wolf plan, there has to be 2 documented breeding packs on the west side. And I honestly believe if we ever got there, it's a moving target, right? I don't think in this state we're ever going to be able to hunt or trap wolves. Right now, our Fish and Wildlife Office, if there's any lethal, it's done by government trappers or hunters or somebody within the agency. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to ever see the general public like out there actively managing our wolf, I'll say, issue or population, whatever one you want to pick. But I think we're going to be on the sidelines on this one for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that Colorado will be on the same path, just a few years behind Washington State. And, with the anti-pushing on trapping, it seems like it's going to be a moving target and an uphill battle for those until, you're like us in Idaho, where you start seeing your pets getting taken, or, you have so many that it becomes an actual problem again for cattle ranchers and get enough associations behind it to maybe make that push.
Yep.
So outside of trapping, I envision the Phelps household as just like people talking in clicks and bugles all the time. Do you speak English in your house first, or is it just that? And then, how did you kind of get into the engineering of like diaphragm calls? Like, I just imagine that being such a hard thing. Was it a passed down through your family and then a perfection? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about how that translated to like predator calling, which is a completely different, type of calling.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we do talk occasionally in my house with words. No, it's actually funny. My kids growing up, like with me being so involved, they bugled with their voice, and I think it drove my wife nuts because all 3 of us would be cranking bugles, whether it was calls or Back then I was cranking out all the diaphragms myself. So, every 10th one you'd pop in your mouth to make sure you were still like, QA, QC. Nowadays I'm ganged up on though. Like both kids and my wife want me like out of the house or out of the shop. Even in our Phelps Game Calls shop, like even the employees like yell at me to go outside or like, hey, that was a little bit loud. Or so I feel like I'm outnumbered now, as far as running calls around. But no, my family, I grew up around a bunch of loggers. They were all like very good woodsmen, but all rifle hunters, right? So nobody really had a need, for elk calls. If anything, we would buy like I remember like they'd have around their neck like those little early like Loman bite and blow cow calls, just so they could maybe stop a cow or not stop a cow, but like stop elk for a shot.
Mm-hmm.
I got really, once again, the way my brain works, I got frustrated because I felt like as I was getting more into hunting, like, hey, I'm putting in all this work, right? I'm out here scouting. None of these, and then hunting season rolls around and all these other guys show up, and it really just depends on what time I set my alarm clock for. Like these guys get up earlier than me. They beat me to my, to a landing. Like I don't like not having more control over the outcome. And it kind of bothered me. I'm like, hey, we've never did this archery elk hunting where there's other skills involved. There's not as many hunters in the woods. So it's more of me versus the animal. I can learn a new skill on calling. So same time as the trapping was kind of taking off, middle of high school, I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to call elk, and go to the store, you order a big Primo's deluxe kit, you figure out what you like, you got, I think that was right as the Terminator, the Blue Reed was coming on. And that year I wasn't going to archery hunt. I was just going to go out and try to learn. I was still going to rifle hunt or muzzleloader. I don't remember which one I had that year, but I'm going to go out and just learn how to call. And the first couple of days I went out, I had multiple big bulls come in, like bigger than any bull I'd ever killed with a rifle. I'm like, this stuff is too easy, right?
And that was in rifle and muzzleloader season.
No, that was our archery. So I went out.
Okay. Just no bow, just went out.
What I advise people not to do now, like don't go screw up. But back then, nobody was archery hunting elk around here, so I really wasn't screwing anybody up. I was just going out messing with the elk, and I'm like, wow, I would have, if I could shoot 30 yards, I would have killed 3 bulls on the opening weekend. I'm like catch and release, elk calling. And I'm like, man, I really like this. So I remember that Christmas, I didn't know about pro shops or any of that back then. So I'm like, Mom and Dad, I want this bow. It's a little expensive. It's kind of over the limit we've ever did, but I want this bow that's on the front of the Cabela's magazine, And so it was like a mail order bow, which nowadays I like cringe at, like, no, go shoot, do all of this other stuff. So I got that bow, found like a local pro shop, and then really got into elk hunting and really wanted to like anything I did, like hone the craft. I didn't want to just be an okay elk hunter. I wanted to be, the best. I wanted to be the best caller. I want to be the best archery elk hunter that, because back then nobody around here really did it. There were a few guys, but they'd occasionally kill one. I'm like, no, I want to have consistency. I want to kill one every year. I want that to be the expectation. And so really just kind of dove deep over the next few years, like learning how to call, mimicking, like, back then it was the Primo's Truth videos, how good are because there wasn't much on the internet back then, like how to learn how to call. There just wasn't anything.
Well, it's hard to do that when you have a dial up. You probably have that.
Yeah.
And
YouTube wasn't a thing. There wasn't great videos. So, all right, the best thing I've got are some old, Wayne Carlton or Primo's Truth videos. Like, let's try to mimic, the real elk that are on there, the sounds that they're making. And just got what I thought was really good and found some success really early on archery elk hunting, and really enjoyed it. And then I really enjoyed that I felt like I had found a way that it was just more of me versus the elk and not me versus the hunters versus the elk. Like it was just a one-on-one game, and found a ton of success. And then over time, like call consistency kind of went away. I'm like, I know that on this call over here, I sound very good, but when I go and buy these from the store, like these next 5 don't sound as good. And about that time, almost becoming bored being a bridge engineer, almost becoming bored with engineering in my day-to-day, but it did give me the skills to be able to draft. And about this time, technology was coming on board where 3D printing was a very viable option to test prototypes for cheap. And so I would say the majority of call manufacturers or owners were like had the gray hair effect. They're all older gentlemen. I'm like, well, I'm the new guy. I'm 25 years old. I'm college educated, which I don't throw a whole lot at, but I'm very handy with the mouse and a computer. Like I can design a part very quickly.
Were you a CAD or a SolidWorks guy?
I was back then I did whatever I had to. So like Civil 3D, there were a few freeware programs. I use SolidWorks now on some more on like analysis, like vibration analysis stuff. But back then it was literally just like get the part the way I think I need it. And then aside from that, there was a lot of what I would call like Frankenstein call building, where I'd be super gluing stuff, taping stuff, building up parts, like shaving it back down, like filing it back down to try to, and then I'd have this finished part. Like this thing works pretty good. Now I don't know how to recreate it. So you'd, sit there with your micrometer, try to like reverse engineer it back. And just really kind of went down that road of what, as an elk hunter, what do I want to use? What do I need to use? Like, what's the quality that I would demand? And really just kind of design calls that I wanted to use. And then it translates very, very well to other hunters. Like, well, if it's good enough for me, it's going to be, so yeah, we started messing around in 2009. I would say it took a while to get some traction. So it was 5 or 6 years before things really started to work. And then, some other patents were up that kind of had blocked some ideas I had. And, that led to some new diaphragm designs. It led to some new bugle tube designs. And then, really kind of hung our hat on the elk side. And then moving forward to become a full call company, we went turkey, predator, deer, and we're still kind of establishing lines, like waterfowl and additional lines.
So how does that R&D work? So like your past, like being in the woods, elk hunting all the time, like what you want in a call. So you can go and play in the workshop, do all of that, and that's led to success. So what does the R&D look like? Let's take the actual predator calls for an example. And the reason I'll do that is a lot of our trappers, might be doing coyote calling or want to do like a rabbit in distress call or wolf howling, whatever the case may be. Are you bringing in experts who are in the field 320 days out of the year in wolf, coyote, or whatever other predator calls you're building to kind of be you in that scenario, to be that feedback loop?
It just depends. So we did a lot of coyote hunting growing up behind just the old Johnny Stewart tape. You'd have to go out there every 30 minutes and flip the tape, or but that, so I felt comfortable like coyote, bobcat calling, all of that. Now when it came to like developing our wolf howler, we reached out to the Stuck in the Rut guys there in Idaho. They were as good as I could, they were buddies of ours. We talked to Tom and his crew all the time, and like they were already using a different wolf howler. Like, hey, help us develop this thing. And so there was a lot of back and forth. Like, what do you want out of it? What tones get the best responses? And so we worked with them back and forth to develop like the wolf howler. Back pressure was huge. So there are times where I can sit and watch YouTube videos of real wolves howl and really kind of dial in on the audio, but there may be something where you might not want to sound exactly like a wolf for hunting, because you may have realized a long time ago that, hey, the long, deep, low note is going to actually elicit more responses than like the pitch break within the wolf call, from a younger one. So there's calls that you design to emulate exact, as close as you can to the real animal. But then there are times where we design a hunting call to be the best hunting call, right? If all that those guys are needing is a response, then you may not want to sound the most like, the most realistic wolf call, if that makes any sense. Like I've got a woodpecker call that I use for turkey hunting. It's not the most accurate woodpecker call, but that sound gives me more shot gobbles from a turkey. So I'm going to tune it that way, because that's really all I want. I don't care if it sounds the most like a woodpecker call. I'm not trying to call on woodpeckers, So it just depends on what our goal is. On the elk call side, there are times where I'll tune an elk call to be a little bit more high pitched, because number one, I want it to travel farther. I feel like sometimes a higher frequency will get a bull to respond more. So you're kind of just always what's the goal? What's the intention? Now, if it's not a locator call and I want to sound like a more mature, rich toned cow, then we may, so it's, yeah. But as far as experts, at times we'll bring them in, and then um, at times I'm confident enough in what we're doing to just go ahead and design the call on my own. Depending on what our pre-designed checklist is. Like, a lot of times my goal is just make a call that sounds good but is very easy to run. So I'm playing with like volume of the barrel, volume, the exhaust back pressure. Um, I think we're to a point where, yeah, there's a lot of good sounding calls, even from some of my competitors. A lot of my design criteria is to go in and make that call sound just as good as it can, but be very, very easy to use as well. So it just really depends on what your goal is, as you set it, set out on a specific design.
Yeah, that follow-on question there. So this comes from my wife's actually a professionally trained musician. I have absolutely zero musical ability and consider myself tone deaf. So as I've gotten into using diaphragm calls for both elk, you know, doing it for wolf, you know, I have a hard time with the pitch. Are you trained at all in music, or has that just come naturally through this?
So no, my music career ended in like 8th grade trumpet playing, right? You had to do it 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Hey, at least the trumpet kind of fits your motif a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks. You know, so and I would say, but I was always, even then, like 8th grade trumpet player. I want to be the best trumpet player. Right? I want to get that solo at the Christmas concert. Like, and so I don't have like an audio engineering background. I do work with quite a few audio engineers. SolidWorks, for those that don't know, is like, it's just a suite of engineering. You can get vibration analysis, plugins. You can get resonant frequency plugins. You can do whatever you. This is such a complicated program, and sometimes I'm not even trained in the modules on how to run it, so I've got to hire an expert. But what I do is I analyze a lot of audio just in equalizer, like taking real elk bugles that we've recorded. Even at MeatEater, we've got one of those big, like they look like satellite dish audio. Like we've went out and recorded a bunch of elk, and so I go and analyze that audio, like what frequency to like naturally match elk are we trying to hit. And then when you go to test an aluminum bugle tube versus a plastic bugle tube, does one of those lend itself with the same diaphragm to get you closer to that? What the SolidWorks say a metal bugle tube is going to get you compared to a plastic. And so while I'm not necessarily an audio engineer, we do a lot of volume readings. Like I want my elk calls to be loud, especially in big canyon country. Like we want them to be like very accurate from a resonant frequency, both tube and diaphragm and the combination thereof. So yeah, we do, from an engineering side, I say I look at that sort of stuff, but not from a like trained, no formal training on that.
Gotcha. So I'm not going to hire you for any wedding singing, but
no.
Hearing that though, I think I'm going to get a petition together from listeners to get the Phelps Foothold trap, because I think the amount of focus and detail that might go into that might help change the trapping industry. So I'm going to push for that.
All right, perfect.
I know we're running up on time here, so I really have 2 questions left for you. I like to do these kind of at the end. So first question I ask every guest is, you spent an insane amount of time out in the woods. What is the weirdest thing you've ever come across, whether on a trap line as a teenager, hunting through your adult years? What's the oddest thing you've ever come across?
Oddest thing. Man, I'm going to start my answer with like other stories. Like I feel like everybody's had cooler stuff happen to them in the woods. Like, random things they've ran into or found out in the woods, or people interactions. Like, I feel like mine has just been super boring and like almost like ran the script. I'm trying to like think as I'm talking here, and I haven't had like, I'll give you one.
Okay.
The weirdest thing, and I'm going to preface this, which like, I'm not claiming whether you need to believe in or not, like aliens, right? Or like different stuff like that. But 2-3 years ago, I go to New Mexico, very close to Roswell. Like, I don't believe in this stuff at all. Like, it doesn't, I think it, whatever. So I'm scouting prior to Steve and the camera crew showing up. And one night I'm I'm hiking in 3 or 4 miles, scout, and then I come back out to my truck 3 to 4 miles, and I'm pushing it fairly close, but it's just like at the very end of daylight.
Mhm.
And I've got to go up and down. I'm trying to get around a fence line on some public private boundaries, and I'm getting close to my truck. Well, as you're walking along, you're kind of just staring at your feet and where your steps are going. I see a big flash, like as you're looking down, almost like lightning had struck, like there was a big flash of light. Well, and then I start to hear a sound that those little ground flower fireworks that buzz around, make these little triangles like bzzz, and then I'm like, it sounded like that. And I look above and there are like 3 orange lights, kind of maybe, I don't know, 1,000 feet up, making that sort of sound. And as I'm watching it, the lights turn from orange to green.
Hmm.
I'm like, what the heck? And I'm like, well, maybe it's like a drone. I don't know why there's a drone above me, or who's running this drone, but it didn't have the same sound as a drone. Well, then it started to get like lower, and I'm like, what in the heck? And then it flashes, that same bright flash, like almost blinding at that time of night. Like, what in the heck is going on? Like, starting to get a little worried. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to walk faster and not really look at this thing. Well, it starts to like follow me, like straight above, like either whoever's got this drone has now recognized that I'm below it. And it flashes like 3 or 4 more times, and it just kind of, and then I look up and it's changing from orange and green. I try to take a picture with my phone, and I cannot take a picture of this thing that is very, very evident with my eyeballs, but my phone cannot capture it. Like, I'm trying to sit there and play with the brightness and lowness. Like, no, it's just I was unable. So then I'm like trying to take a selfie with it. Like, maybe it's the camera. I don't know what it was. I don't know it's just a coincidence that we were down in that section in New Mexico. But that was the weirdest thing. And still to this day, I still don't believe in that stuff, but something was off that day. Either somebody had a drone that was like government type level, like it was, you couldn't take a picture of it, but something was a little off. And I don't know what it was, but it freaked me out a little bit that night. And still bothers me to this day that, like, I don't know what it was.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thread with people I ask. Like, I don't believe in aliens, but if I did, here's this experience I had, and I've
Yeah.
had some similar ones. That's a good one.
Yeah. It's either aliens or government messing with me that night.
Hey, they want to get into action on they want to extract it from your brain on how
Yeah.
you do it. All right, last hypothetical. Would you rather fight 10 pine marten sized mountain lions or 1 mountain lion sized pine marten, and why?
I'm going with the smaller size.
Okay.
I feel like I can kick him and beat him off faster than the one larger animal might still get me.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to fight the 10 pine marten sized cougars.
Yeah. Yeah. That
I
would be a tough
think.
one.
I mean, it's going to be a tough fight either way, but I think I'm going to go for like my big frame being able to handle the smaller critter. Hopefully before they like gang up on me. But then you watch Jurassic Park. Not saying that this applies to real life at all, but like those little teeny dinosaurs that, you get a whole bunch of those, like they end up, my wife's way better at Jurassic Park than me, but like I only just catch pieces. I'm walking through the house, but whatever them little teeny things were, like messed with that one super dinosaur they made and really kind of screwed it up. So
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good choice. But Jason, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking trapping with me in the past. But I know you guys have a lot of things going on. I know a lot of our community would be interested in some of the howlers and other calls. Anything you want to plug or tell where people can go and check out a little bit more on some of the things you've got going on and where they can find your eventual foothold traps?
yeah. So everything we do is it's all over social. So Instagram, we're at Phelps Game Calls, or my personal one's at Jason Glenn Phelps. I wasn't really planning on doing a personal one, but everybody thought it'd be a good idea, so I could share a little bit more of my personal stuff, not so much business oriented. We're on Facebook. Our website's phelpsgamecalls.com, and we try to be at as many of the shows still in person. As things grow, sometimes it's easy to just like stop going to the shows, but we're usually, myself or Dirk, all the shows that we put on, we try to make ourselves accessible, open to answer questions, and just want to be good stewards of hunting and trapping and in the industry, and hopefully be a knowledge base for people that may have questions or don't know. And we've really enjoyed our time and enjoy the position that we're in.
Yeah, and I can be a straight testament to that. You and I actually met for the first time at Western Hunt Expo last year, and you dealt with me coming up and introducing myself, and you were nice enough to stay in contact over the last year. So the words ring true, and I appreciate it. And for those listening, reach out if you have questions. Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Jason. And we'll catch you next time on the next episode of Okayest Trapper Podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Zach.